now. Detonate the reality bomb!
I will build a great, great wall.
Some alien race to come down and threaten us.
Is the singularity near?
The truth is out there.
The military-industrial complex.
The seven mountains of the influencers of culture.
To be as gods, you know.
Change has come to America.
Catapult of propaganda.
From a secure location on top of the ridge in the heart of the beautiful Missouri Ozarks, this is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
The coyotes are howling, the dachshund is sleeping, and that means once again it is time for A View from the Bunker Live this Sunday night, January 20th, 2019. In this program tonight, we talk about the super blood wolf moon. Is it prophetically significant? President Trump offers a train. Pelosi says no deal. The media once again proves they're a bunch of lying liars who lie. BuzzFeed's bombshell went bluey. We'll talk about that. And Gillette tries to sell razors by insulting its customer base. Not smart. Our guest segment tonight, it sounds like a movie plot, but this is real. Shelley Neese, author of the Copper Scroll Project, joins us at the bottom of the hour. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Well, if you joined us tonight, we appreciate you doing so, whether it's at Spreaker.com, iHeartRadio, Stitcher.com, Spotify.com, or, of course, you can always listen live at the website, which is www.vftb.net, View from the Bunker. If you missed the live program and choose to listen in the archives, that's okay, too. You can subscribe to the podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify. We've got links to everywhere. You can download and have it done automatically. Download the archives at vftb.net. The easiest way, of course, is by just downloading the free mobile app. Send these programs directly to your smartphone or tablet, whether it's iOS or Android. And we've got links to the iTunes App Store and the Google Play Store at vftb.net. Of course, the website, well, you've already heard that about 4 times now. The YouTube channel, where we archive the audio-only portion of this broadcast, which is, of course, audio only, is youtube.com/Derek Gilbert. And on social media, you'll find us at facebook.com/viewfromthebunker, Twitter @viewfrombunker, or @Derek Gilbert. I answer to either. And you can check out the new platform that we're using at oneway.com, oneway.com @Derek P. Gilbert. As mentioned, today is January the 20th of 2019. We were 1 minute late getting on the air tonight. That's just old radio guy talk. Actually, we're streaming live to the interwebs, so not actually over the air. But anyway, because just before broadcast tonight, we saw on our Twitter feed that there is more violence taking place between Israel and Syria. The IDF confirmed just over an hour ago, and this is also being reported by media out of Syria, that as of about 6:05 Central Time here in the U.S., which is UTC -6, so just about an hour ago, Israel began bombing targets, Iranian targets, near Damascus. The IDF has warned Syria not to intervene. This was hours after Syria, the Assad regime, fired a missile at Israel in what was probably retaliation for an attack by the IDF near Damascus earlier in the day. Now, this is not funny, but it's almost humorous, because one of the main responses being reported by the Times of Israel tonight is that the Army has decided that the Mount Hermon ski resort should be closed down until tensions settle down. This kind of tracks with what we saw when we were in Israel in May, which was, and while we were there, of course, is when the American embassy was moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and that prompted some pretty energetic and intense protests along the border with the Gaza Strip. Hamas was sending people to charge the border, which resulted in dozens of people being killed, sadly. But while we were there earlier that week, one night while we were in Nazareth, some of us who were kind of half awake heard planes flying overhead, which you don't often hear in Israel. And these were certainly not passenger jets. They were military jets. You could tell that much anyway. Even for a non-veteran like myself, I could tell that those are not engines that would be attached to a passenger plane of any kind. And sure enough, the IDF had sent planes northward to strike inside Syria while we were there. And the only impact that all of this had on our tour was that the IDF didn't allow us to go up Mount Bental, which is near Mount Hermon, from which Mount Bental you can see Damascus on a clear day, because Damascus is only about 40 miles away. They said, now, we're pretty sure Iran is going to do something. There's some stuff going on the other side of the border. This, what we were seeing in the newspapers. And so Mount Bental was shut down. And that night, of course, was when Israel launched its raid, launched the strikes into Syria. So, but that was the only, schools weren't closed. Kids were still in class the following day. Businesses were still open. It's just we couldn't go up the mountain, which would have possibly made us a target up there. So that was the only impact on our tour. But as often as we've talked about Mount Hermon on this program and on Skywatch TV, it is almost a bit humorous to see that for all of the spiritual, historical, supernatural significance of Mount Hermon, its connection to the Watchers in Canaanite religion, it was the Mount of Assembly for their creator god El. And the Israelis have a ski resort on the southern slope of Mount Hermon. So that will be closed down. It had been open in spite of some recent tension between Israel and Syria. The bombed targets, according to the IDF, belong to the Iranian elite Quds force in the countryside near Damascus. And again, bear in mind, that's only about 40 miles from the border there in the Golan Heights. And we here in the United States don't really have a sense of scale when it comes to how close everything is in Israel. A friend of ours, Avi Lipkin, tells me that when he goes to the grocery store at the village that he lives in, on a clear day, you can turn one way, you can see Amman, Jordan. Turn the other way, you can see the hills of Jerusalem. That's how small the land is that's been fought over by various people groups ever since, about 1400 BC, so 3,400 years. That's how close together these people have been living. But it seems bigger than life when we read the stories in the Bible. So we have no qualms or hesitation about returning back in May. We'll tell you more about that, talk more about that later in the program. And, of course, our conversation with Shelley Neese should be especially interesting because it relates not only to hidden treasure of what could be the greatest archaeological discovery of all time, which is why I say her book, The Copper Scroll Project, sounds like the plot from a Hollywood movie. But it also, whenever you're talking about archaeology in Israel, you're also talking about politics. So we'll get into some of that in our conversation with Shelley Neese in about 25 minutes or so. Elsewhere this week, President Trump Saturday, proposed a compromise to try to end the ongoing partial shutdown of the federal government. He proposed funding for humanitarian assistance and drug detection technology, increases in Border Patrol agents and immigration judges, changes to the asylum application process for minors, a greater emphasis on family reunification, plus $5.7 billion in border wall funding, and protections for DACA recipients. These are the so-called Dreamers and TPS holders. This was offered as a compromise to Democrats. The president is now suggesting that the border wall be a strategic deployment of physical barriers, steel barriers in high-priority locations. In other words, not a 2,000-mile-long concrete structure from sea to sea. I suspect that this is what the president was talking about all along when talking about a border wall. He's a businessman. He's not going to make his best offer first. And politicians either seem not to understand that or they pretend that they don't understand it so they can try to make the president look bad. But if you're a Trump supporter, and I am, I wouldn't necessarily consider this a caving in to Democrat pressure. I think the president is just sensing that now is the time to extend a little bit of an olive branch. You give a little bit, and if they come back to the table and they give some, then he gets what he wants, they get what they want, and everybody can go home and say, hey, we won. That's how you do business. So we shall see. What this also does, if the president's supporters play this right, is come back and say, you know what, the president's really not proposing anything any different than what most of these longtime Democrats in Congress voted for back in 2006. Because the barrier fence that they voted for in 2006 was amended by Congress in 2007. It was supposed to be a double fence along the entire southern border. And then in 2007, they amended it to give the Secretary of Homeland Security the option to only employ the barrier at strategically significant, high-priority locations. And that is more or less what the president is now proposing. So get Senator Schumer and Congresswoman Pelosi. Well, she voted against the barrier back in 2006, but Schumer, former Senator Hillary Clinton, and former President Obama, when he was a senator, were all in favor of and voted for this proposal back in 2006. So we shall see what happens there. Now, of course, the media this week tried to make more hay, put more pressure on the president. There was a big so-called bombshell released by BuzzFeed. Yeah. BuzzFeed is well on its way to becoming the place where you just turn to for, quizzes. Like, what breed of cat are you? Because that's about how valuable their news reporting, or how accurate their news reporting is turning out to be. They hit another, well, it wasn't even a weak ground ball back to the pitcher, much less, certainly not a home run. But I think this is a strike two. You might remember they're the ones that leaked the so-called Steele dossier, the one that made all those salacious and rather insulting claims about the president with no evidence whatsoever, which, of course, was used then by the FBI and the Department of Justice to spy on the Trump presidential campaign. Anyway, they released a so-called bombshell that the president's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, had told Special Counsel Robert Mueller that the president had advised him to lie about the president's dealings with Russia. And, of course, the media, which you understand is just Democratic operatives with bylines, were all over it. This was on Thursday, but then on Friday, the spokesman for Robert Mueller said, well, no, that's not accurate. That's not accurate. Cohen didn't actually say that. And, of course, the media was really disappointed and upset that, this is going to make Trump supporters think that we're just out to get him. Well, yeah, you think? The more the media tries to get, they are playing into President Trump's hands. He is so trolling the media, and they just can't help themselves. They just make it worse for themselves by continuing to jump on these stories. In fact, I saw on Twitter earlier today somebody who had collated the 50 stories so far, the top 50 stories that the media has had to retract about the Russia investigation. Stories that were published and then found out later to be factually untrue. So anyway, this so-called bombshell by BuzzFeed, which just drove the news cycle for a good chunk of the weekend, even after Mueller said through his spokesman, no, this story is not true. They continue to pound the drum. But again, all it does is convince the supporters of the president that, yeah, you know what, the media really is totally biased and completely out to get him. And when that story didn't go the way they wanted it to, the next opportunity, I guess, for the liberal media, but I repeat myself, to try to make the supporters of the president look really bad was at the March for Life in Washington, D.C. And you know that there had to be something like this for the media to pay any attention at all to the March for Life. A group of boys, high school students from a Catholic high school, white Catholic high school students, many of whom were wearing red Make America Great Again caps, were videoed apparently harassing an old and frail Indian veteran during the March for Life. There was an Indigenous Peoples March going on in Washington, D.C. at the same time. And so this video went viral, and you had some very prominent liberals, and not just in the media, but in Hollywood and others, who were just railing on Twitter and other social media outlets that this is horrible. This is just the type of person that you'd find at this type of an event. Of course, the March for Life is to raise awareness and to try to show support for those politicians in Congress who are standing up for the rights of the unborn. Anyway, this video, when you viewed it from a certain angle, appeared to make these boys look like they were harassing this gentleman, whose name was Nathan Phillips. But other video surfaced shortly thereafter, taken from different angles and showing more context. And it appears that what happened is that these students from Covington Catholic High School were waiting for their bus and decided to sing their school fight song. And Mr. Phillips apparently decided to take his drum and walk right up and get right in the faces of these young men banging the drum. And the kids were standing there kind of confused about what was going on. So when you see more context, which of course the media didn't want to because this was, bias confirmation, they began basically vilifying and even threatening this kid. What this kid needs to be punched. Stuff like that. It's a sad example again of how desperately the media and progressives want to fulfill a certain narrative and are willing to take things out of context to do so. Now, we conservatives can be guilty of the same thing. We need to be very careful before we start throwing invectives around that we know what we're talking about. But sadly, in this case, this young man who has been, because activists were starting to dox kids that were shown in the video, and doxing, of course, means disclosing personal contact information, just sharing it out there in hopes that somebody will take it upon themselves to, find the kid where he lives and teach him a lesson one way or another. I mean, it's reprehensible. It's reprehensible. But again, the media jumping on this and progressive jumping on it and doing so without proper context. But that is how, sadly, media and how our political discourse is going in this day and age. I mean, it was bad enough. I mean, there are plenty of examples in American history, 17th, 18th, 19th century, where things got out of hand and guys, come to blows, fight duels. In the little town we lived in Indiana for a little while, Shelbyville, Indiana, within the last 120 years, local sheriff was shot out in the middle of the main intersection in town because of a political rally that got out of hand. Sadly, social media makes it a lot easier to drum up flash mobs to try to instigate violence like this. By the way, speaking of media, Alex Jones and InfoWars has now been dropped from Roku. Roku apparently finding his content just unbecoming, a violation of their terms of service or some such thing. Now, at Skywatch TV and here on this program, we talk about things that might be considered delicate or politically incorrect. But one of the things I hope that we do, and I'm not always successful at this, but hopefully we will lead with a little more gentleness and respect, which is our biblical command as Christians. We don't redefine what God defined as right and wrong. We're not going to try to stretch the biblical definitions of sin to accommodate the culture. But if people who disagree with us see us coming with hatred in our eyes, we're not likely to win. We're not likely to win anybody over. And but having said that, if you're going to play on somebody's platform, whether it's YouTube or Google, which is one and the same, Twitter, Facebook, even Roku, there's only a relatively small charge to get a channel on Roku. They get to set their terms of service, and if they want to deplatform you, well, yeah, what we as conservatives need to do is develop other platforms. The irony of this, of course, is that then you get somebody like Nicole Wallace, who's a host at MSNBC, who claimed with a straight face during a discussion of Iowa Congressman Steve King that there isn't a strain of racism on the left, that there is no racism whatsoever on the political left. I mean, she does realize that she works at the same network that employs Al Sharpton, right? I mean, Sharpton, well, I won't beat a horse that's already on life support. If you don't know the history of Al Sharpton, just do a little Googling and find out what he has said about Jews and white people over the years. But even taking that a step further, when you get right down to it, the social justice initiatives that are pushed by liberals really is a form of racism just by a different name. People of certain ethnic backgrounds can't succeed unless we, pave the ground for them, unless we, push the obstacles out of the way for them. That really isn't helpful. It really isn't helpful. It's just racism by a different name. We here in America really could use a little bit of education, just a little more thought, whether it comes to expressing our opinions or just, how the government works. And we talked recently about the congressman from Tennessee wants to eliminate the Electoral College. A new poll came out this week that shows that a vast majority of Americans are in favor of raising our top tax rate, the income tax rate, to 70%. It's about 59% overall. Women more than men, a little more supportive of raising that top tax rate. But we have an example from very recent history that suggests that doing so would be a really, really bad move. In France, back in 2012, the former president there, François Hollande, a socialist, decided to soak the rich. Played that card because it plays well with his base, raised the top tax rate to 75%. But they found out very quickly that when you start doing that to wealthy people, and this 75% applied to money earned over 1 million euros. Roughly $1 million. I mean, it's depending on the exchange rate, but you get the idea. When you're up into that kind of tax bracket, you're doing pretty well for yourself. But it means you've also got the resources to get out of someplace, to move away from someplace that's trying to tax you and take 70% of your earnings. So the famous French actor Gérard Depardieu moved to Belgium and then obtained Russian citizenship. Russian citizenship. He found that preferable to staying in France and paying 75% on his earnings above 1 million euros. Others did the same thing. If they're wealthy, they've got the money to, if they're earning that kind of money, they got the money to pack up and go. And they did. So local real estate prices plunged in France. They found it was difficult to attract world-class executive talent for their multinational corporations. And others just found other ways to hide their money. So Hollande found that, the economy tanked too. And so they backed off the top rate to 50%, but it didn't work well. And so they've backed away from that. And again, this was in 2012. So just 6-7 years ago, we've got the example of what happens when you try doing that. And yet here in the United States, a majority of registered voters, 59%, support the idea. Let us learn from history so we are not condemned to repeat it. We also find that a majority of college students, are all in favor of socialism. A majority of college students and people, young adults, favor socialism here in the United States, but the same poll also found that a majority of them could not define socialism, which is interesting. What do we want? We don't know. When do we want it now? Speaking of social media, you might want to consider not taking that 10-year challenge on Facebook. This is a very popular meme over the last couple of weeks, posting a picture of yourself from 10 years ago and one from today. Do you not realize that this is Facebook's way of getting us to volunteer the information, the data that it needs to train its artificial intelligence facial recognition software to recognize how human faces typically age over the span of 10 years? We are training the AIs that will soon be used to control us. Do not take the 10-year challenge. It is not worth it. Also, Twitter admitting that if you're an Android user and you use Twitter with an Android smartphone or tablet, the private tweets that you thought were private, protected so that only a select few could see them, Well, not so much. On Thursday, Twitter admitted that they'd become aware of an issue where the Protect Your Tweets setting was disabled on Twitter for Android. Now, if you're using Twitter on your desktop or using it on an Apple device, an iOS device, you're fine. But Android, all of those tweets that have been that you thought were protected and private going back to November 3 of 2014, 4 years worth, not private at all. Just assume anything you put on the internet is eventually going to wind up on the internet. You might as well staple it to your next resume. And finally, this past week, Gillette issued put out what was supposed to be a viral marketing campaign, and it did go viral. Actually, this 2-minute mini movie, hashtag the best men can be, essentially trying to man shame us for the actions of, what's I guess the best word I can come up with, the archaic word, cads, the behavior of cads. Men who treat women as objects, men who like to beat up other men. Look, this has gone on since the beginning of history. And this 2-minute ad was filled with stereotypes of, a bunch of stern-faced men over their barbecue grills, refusing to step in and do anything and just excusing bad behavior by saying, well, boys will be boys. I'm not quite sure this is going to help Gillette the way they had hoped it will help. I mean, it did go viral. As of the middle of the week, I checked, it had about 17 million views. And that's the kind of, response you like to get when you post something to YouTube. But the call to action here, from a marketing standpoint, what is the call to action? Gillette, quite frankly, is looking for something to reverse its fortunes. 10 years ago, Gillette had a 70% share of the men's razor market. And that's now down to 50% because a lot of us decided years ago, I really don't like paying $4 a blade for a blade that's only going to last me for 5 or 6 shaves. And we started looking for alternatives. So their market share, thanks to things like, the shave clubs that are out there now, they've dropped to below 50%. Over the last 10 years, they've lost 20% market share. And so they put out this campaign, which essentially tries to shame its target market, saying, yes, you're right, we behave badly towards women, and so we should. Well, look, I agree that there is a segment of the male population out there that treats women badly, that treats other men badly, boys who are not properly raised and will harm other boys. We understand that. But the question here is, what is Gillette really trying to accomplish? Are they really trying to raise awareness and improve society, or are they just trying to sell more razors? That's a rhetorical question. The answer is obvious. They're trying to sell more razors. Well, sorry. I switched to actually the company that manufactures razors for those shave clubs. They also manufacture razors for some of the dollar stores out there. It's called Dorco, D-O-R-C-O. Just a bit of friendly advice, guys, and I get no compensation for saying this. I'm just a happy customer. But if you want a good shave at literally half the price, a better shave than I ever got from the Gillette Fusion razors, their 5-blade, try Dorco. You'll find them online at dorcousa.com, D-O-R-C-O. Better razor, half the price, and no man-shaming. Well, all right, enough ranting for half an hour. We're going to talk about some fascinating stuff because, A, archaeology is cool, and B, this archaeological find may be one of biblical proportions. Like I said, this sounds like a movie plot, but it's real. Coming up, Shelley Neese, author of the Copper Scroll Project, How an Ancient Secret Fuels the Battle for the Temple Mount. That's straight ahead. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.
As many as 80% of Americans are carrying a time bomb. A medical crisis in their bodies right now, unaware that they will soon develop prolonged chronic illness, autoimmune disease, or even cancer. Today's frightening truth is citizens are being poisoned every single day without their knowledge. A health epidemic largely brought on by industrialized food is destroying our genetics and immune systems through deadly modified organisms, carcinogenic materials, and life-threatening chemicals commonly found in most of today's processed groceries. Coming this April in the groundbreaking new book, Time Bomb, by Joe Ardis Horn and Allie Anderson. You'll be put in charge of your health once again as commercial marketing games are exposed and the expose of the year unveils how easy it is to avoid toxic ingredients, identify organic and safe foods, and make healthy eating affordable. You will learn how neuroscience is confirming an amazing gut-brain connection that holds the key to maintaining physical, hormonal, emotional, and mental wellness. With powerful insights from health professionals for maintaining superior physiology and reversing chronic illness without a weight loss diet, Time Bomb is set to become your most important field guide for avoiding a national health epidemic more pervasive than anyone could have ever imagined. Time Bomb.
There is a genocide of deadly processed foods happening right now in the United States, creating a health epidemic more pervasive than anyone ever imagined. But now, you can arm yourself with the knowledge to keep you and your family from becoming its next victim. Skywatch TV is proud to announce the Time Bomb special offer. When you order Time Bomb from the Skywatch TV store, you'll also receive the Time Bomb Companion DVD. This incredible DVD includes special, never-before-released, off-the-record interviews with healthcare professionals like Dr. Ralph Umbriaco, Dr. Joshua Vance, and Dr. Matthew Sams on the current food crisis in the U.S., and tips on how to achieve your optimal physiological health. This DVD is nearly 5 hours in length and also includes the entire Skywatch TV Time Bomb television series with Joe Horn, Allie Anderson, and Derek Gilbert. But that's not all. You'll also receive Eat This and Live for Kids. This colorful, fully illustrated book by Dr. Don Colbert walks you step by step through how to begin teaching your kids to love the foods that will love them back. While out shopping, how to avoid deadly toxins in many common kids' foods and household products. What to feed your kids from preschool to preteen. Healthy snacks they will love, and what supplements they'll desperately need, and so much more. But the health epidemic isn't just limited to humankind. Also included in this unbelievable special offer, Joe Ardis Horn's best-selling book, The Dead Pets Don't Lie Expose, and companion DVD. This shocking book and DVD collection sounds the alarm on the scandalous practices of the commercial pet food industry. Learn how the FDA is allowing big scams where detestable, poisonous pet foods are being passed off as healthy and causing pets to die prematurely. You'll learn everything you need to know in order to quickly read pet food labels and allow your pet to avoid these toxic ingredients. Sold separately, these items hold a retail value of over $100. Yours now for a donation of only $30 plus shipping and handling. Take control today. The Time Bomb special offer is your field guide to avoiding the deadly processed foods and ingredients that are creating a massive wave of health crisis in America. This information covers every member of the family, the adults, children, and even our pets. Begin transforming how you and your family eat and live now. The Time Bomb special offer. Order now at the Skywatch TV store online or call 844-750-4985.
Shall we begin? Let's begin now.
If it's Sunday night, it's A View from the Bunker Live. I'm Derek Gilbert. Tonight, we've got an astronomical phenomenon taking place here. Should be visible from where we are in the Ozarks. About 3 hours from now, the super blood wolf moon, and we'll talk about that in about 1 hour in our final segment tonight. What is it? When will it peak? And what exactly does it mean? But now, our interview segment tonight, we bring on a guest who's written a book that is fascinating because the story that it tells is, again, it's like something that could be a movie plot, a movie starring Harrison Ford or Nicolas Cage. She's got a master's degree in Middle Eastern Studies from Ben Gurion University in Israel, worked for Israel's Consul General to New England, first Christian to hold that position, and is currently Vice President of the Jerusalem Connection International. We are honored to welcome the author of the Copper Scroll Project, How an Ancient Secret Fuels the Battle for the Temple Mount, to the program. Shelley Neese, thank you for joining us tonight.
Derek, thanks for having me.
What is the Copper Scroll?
Well, the Copper Scroll is one of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's amazing how many, I feel like a lot of people that are pretty well versed in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the ones that are the most famous ones, the ones that you see at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, very few people have heard of the Copper Scroll, even though really it's the most enigmatic, it's the most mysterious, and the most exciting for that reason. But what the Copper Scroll is, it's an ancient treasure map. It's 2,000 years old, like the rest of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It is, when you roll it out, it's about 7 feet long, 2 feet wide, and it lists over 60 locations where treasure was buried in ancient Israel.
The first time I heard this, I thought the Copper Scroll was made up, to be honest with you, because there are a lot of things that relate to end times prophecy. People really excited, and information starts floating around the web, and you're not always getting accurate information that's cut and pasted and shared back and forth. But so when you first heard about this Copper Scroll, where did you hear about it, and what was it that convinced you that hey, there was something worth digging into here?
Sure. Well, I wish it was something more obvious than this, but when I first heard it, so I visited the Dead Sea Scrolls many times. I lived in Israel for about 4 years, and the Dead Sea Scrolls fascinated me as they fascinate any believer, just for what it contributed to my faith and for what they proved about the historicity and authenticity of the Bible and how well it had been preserved for 2,000 years. So that's what we all know and love about the Dead Sea Scrolls. And when I first heard about the Copper Scroll, my first instinct was like you. Just it puts up all of your cynical red flags,
yeah.
And with good reason. So I met a man named Jim Barfield at a conference in Dallas. I was there as a young journalist, just looking for a story, and met this man who really, upon introduction, I said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Well, I'm meeting with the Israel Antiquities Authority. I think I might have solved the Copper Scroll." And so before I decided to write, even just an article about him, it was kind of the most interesting thing I came across at that conference. And I needed a 1,300-word article. This was 10 years ago. I went home and just did what anybody does and Wikipedia'd Copper Scroll, first to even find out if this was real. And I just couldn't believe it because, it was even more exciting than what he was able to brief me in that hour meeting. And I think too, because I had all my defenses up, all my cynical defenses, I wasn't even really listening or hearing completely what he was saying because I just kept kind of rolling my eyes internally at what he was saying. But really, the Copper Scroll is probably the scroll more than any other that Dead Sea Scroll scholars have the most agreement on.
That's surprising.
Yeah, in that way, I mean that, all of the other Dead Sea Scrolls have value to us, either because of the literary value, what they teach us about the way the Jewish people were living 2,000 years ago, or, they help us really dig into Isaiah and Samuel and see, if the order then is the same as it came out in the canonized Bible. And so things like that are super interesting for biblical scholarship, but also create lots of debate. The Copper Scroll, however, really has no value in those terms. It doesn't help us take a peek into any of those things that I said. It doesn't provide any biblical narrative. There's no characters. There's no biblical characters, but certainly even no historical ones. It's just a really dry inventory. So in some ways, if we weren't talking about buried treasure, it's like finding someone's old inventory list, an old banker's file. The thing is that, so that's what they all agree on, is that this has to be authentic. Otherwise, there's really no purpose to it.
So this was found at Qumran among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Where was it found, and how was it decoded? Where does Jim Barfield enter the story?
Sure. Well, it was found in 1952. The very first Dead Sea Scrolls were found in 1947 by Bedouin Shepherd, and people kind of know that story, which is fascinating in its own right. But really, after Bedouin found the first Dead Sea Scrolls, it was a race among archaeologists and Bedouin of who could find the next cave. In general, the Bedouin proved to be, they're the kings of the desert, so they proved to be much more adept at finding more Dead Sea Scroll caves. There were now we know that there were 12 Dead Sea Scroll caves, or that's the number that we have now. At first we thought it was only 11. And it was actually an archaeological team that found the third cave. And in that cave was where the Copper Scroll was hidden. But it wasn't so obvious. That particular cave, Cave 3, it was led by a French archaeologist and a team of about 10. And so they were disappointed with that cave because the roof of the cave had collapsed in antiquity. So they could tell that the cave had once housed about 40 scroll jars, and so probably a few scrolls per jar. But because all the scroll jars were broken and shattered, for the most part, all of the scrolls were just left to time and rodents and weathered. And so not much survived well, even though it was probably a vast Dead Sea Scroll library when it was first hidden away. And so they were wrapping up the dig, and it was really in the last few hours of the last day of this dig in Cave 3 that they noticed that there was almost a false wall at the back of the cave, almost creating, and this is kind of common with some of the Dead Sea Scroll caves, that sometimes there can be almost caves within a cave. Some of the Dead Sea Scroll caves are more like cave complexes. And it wasn't obvious because there was a wall protecting kind of this last inner chamber. And it was, once they were able to chip through that wall, they saw 2 rolls of copper, because the Copper Scroll was once one, but it had snapped in 2, and was when it was rolled up, and it was resting on a man-made shelf, which the man-made shelf is my favorite part, because it's not just like it was a hasty deposit of someone on the run. I mean, this was a carefully selected hiding spot for the Copper Scroll.
So how then, I mean, I presume after being buried as far back, at least 2,000 years ago, like most of the other scrolls that are found at Qumran, that this copper over time became very, very brittle. How did they go about getting it opened, so they could take a look at it and figure out what was on the thing?
Right. Well, so at first, yes, it did what copper does, and it oxidized and it turned the color of the Statue of Liberty, and it was really just crumbling at the slightest touch. Now, mind you, this is 1952. The black market is being flooded with Dead Sea Scrolls and Dead Sea Scroll fragments. The cave that was found after this one is Cave 4, which had thousands and thousands of fragmented Dead Sea Scrolls. So really, Dead Sea Scroll scholars, they were called a team, an editorial team of Dead Sea Scroll scholars, were busy piecing all of these scrolls back together like jigsaw puzzles. We're trying to beat the Bedouin in terms of finding the next cave, and then trying to buy up what was on the black market. So it was a very busy time for a very small team. And so even though the Copper Scroll was fascinating and clearly fascinating, why was it made out of copper? Why was it so different than all of the rest? They were just an overworked force. And so really the Copper Scroll was put on a back burner in terms of figuring out how to open it. And it wasn't a huge priority for for most of the team, but there was one man, his name was John Allegro. He's called the maverick of the team, or there's a book about him, and he's the stone in the soup. I mean, he was probably the least popular later on in his career among all of the Dead Sea Scroll scholars, just because his story with the Copper Scroll probably shows a little bit of just his tenacity and guts, but also, yeah, a little bit more hasty to act than the rest of the team members. But so but what was interesting is that they could see the scroll was rolled up. They couldn't open it, but they were able to make out. There was a German scholar who was able, with mirrors and cameras, to make out certain words that at least were protruding from the outer layer of the scroll. And what they could tell that it said was dig, gold.
Oh.
Treasure, talent. So the very first guess was, I think this might be a verbal treasure map, just for those few words. And they could even see that they were repeating themselves, that the word gold and silver was repeating itself on the scroll. So it's hard for me to imagine how this happened, but it sat there for 3 years until finally John Allegro was able to get. We're talking about all of this happened under the Jordan Antiquities Authority. And so Israel Antiquities Authority wasn't in control of that part of Israel yet. That wouldn't happen until 1967.
Yeah. I think historically we need to remind folks that it wasn't until 1967 that Israel got control of the West Bank. So all of this, technically, while this was happening between 52 and 67, was Jordan.
Totally. Which means also no Jewish scholars were allowed to study ancient Hebrew text.
Right.
And that was probably the best scholars in the world on ancient Hebrew weren't allowed to touch them until 1967. They weren't allowed on the team. It was all made up of international Hebrew experts. So interestingly, John Allegro is able to get one of the scrolls. He gets approval to bring one of the scrolls to his alma mater, which was Manchester University. So he manages to take one of the scrolls to London with the agreement that he would talk to the metallurgy department. He would find some kind of specialist that could see if they were able to unroll the relic. He even talked to someone at Johns Hopkins University. Really, before he ended up at Manchester University, he had workshopped the idea out to others. And really, I mean, who would want to accidentally shatter what was clear at that point was a 2,000-year-old treasure map? So,
yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty big responsibility. And in the end, he ends up getting this man, and this is just probably, was definitely a divine intervention, but his name was Henry Wright Baker. He was a believer. He had guts and he had skill, and it turned out, that was exactly what they needed. And he created a really crude contraption out of materials, some retired war materials, other materials that he borrowed from the School of Dentistry, and you could see pictures of it online, and it'll just make you cringe. The whole thing, every time it would rotate and spin, would sort of jump on its axis. And the idea was that he would cut it. He would basically cut the scroll into strips and therefore be able to open it and read it that way. And it had a saw on it, and he was able to blow the dust away as he was simultaneously making the cut. Really amazing. Really took a lot of guts, and it worked. He actually did it by himself. He made the first cut. The agreement was that he and John Allegro, after he had made the contraption, that they would meet back the next morning and make the first cut. But he did it that night by himself alone. And in his diary, he wrote that should he have shattered the document, he wanted to be alone in his misery. So by the time, and the person who was supposed to be chaperoning the Copper Scroll and fully responsible for it wasn't even there, but much to his delight, he came back the next day and it was open. So John Allegro was the first Hebrew scholar that was able to lay eyes on it. And really, Hebrew is an interesting, there's a second grader in Israel can take a stab at any of the Dead Sea Scrolls, could take a stab at the Copper Scroll. I mean, the Copper Scroll's bad handwriting, but But, it's much like us trying to read Shakespeare now. It's doable. So for a Hebrew scholar, when he's looking at the open rolls, he was able to make at least a pretty quick translation right there on the fly. And it was everything that he had ever hoped. More gold, more silver. Where, when did dig? It's pretty exciting. And he did write a letter back to the head of the Jordanian Antiquities Department. And he wasn't a very reserved man by his nature. And so he wrote back and said, get a shovel, get a spade. This scroll is red hot. We've got to go digging.
We're talking with Shelley Nease. She's the author of The Copper Scroll Project and A View from the Bunker. What did come of that? I mean, did they start digging and finding things? I mean, I've got a ton of questions here, and there are some that relate to the authors of the scroll, which would speak to the dates and why somebody would create this map. But I'm curious now, what did the Jordanian government do when they heard back that hey, this is a treasure map, and apparently there's something really valuable in our territory?
Right. They immediately downplayed it. So the New York Times broke an article about it and just mocked it, really. Said this is something that looks like it was written on Treasure Island. That's literally a quote from the New York Times saying it looks like something that was written in the light of the moon in blood on Treasure Island. So really almost made a mockery of it right from the beginning with no real scholarship behind them and making that assumption. Now, some people think that perhaps because it was this race between Bedouin and archaeologists in terms of finding Dead Sea Scrolls, if word leaked out that there was serious gold, silver, and treasure buried underneath the sands of the Judean desert, then the Bedouin could have turned the whole place upside down.
Sure.
So maybe there was some wisdom in downplaying it, but I do feel like there was another scholar who was technically in charge. The way the Dead Sea Scrolls scholarship worked the first really 2 decades was one person would be assigned each scroll, and so really no one was allowed to publish that scroll or write commentary about it or anything. It could only be that scholar that was in charge of that scroll. And even though John Allegro proved to be the champion of the Copper Scroll, he was not that person. It was someone else, and that other person said his name was Joseph Milik, a very talented scroll scholar, but he immediately said, "This is just a prop in ancient folklore. This is nothing."
Wow. So who were the authors of this, and how do we know who or when this copper scroll was inscribed?
Right. So we actually don't know who the authors are. It never says. Interestingly, we don't know who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls either, technically. Mm-hmm. We assume it was the Essenes. They never say by the Essenes. The Essenes, the Dead Sea Scrolls, they never even refer to themselves as the Essenes. We get that from Josephus. And so they refer to themselves as the Yechad, or the Way. So staying true to that form and making it very hard for historians later, the Copper Scroll never identifies its authorship. However, interestingly, it's several different handwritings. I mean, almost any investigator could take a glance at the Copper Scroll and realize that this was not one person who was etching this out. Granted, it had to be done with a hammer and a chisel, so it was done much differently than the rest of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are all on papyrus or leather. I should note there's never been another metal document found in Israel. There's been one found in Egypt. Also relating to temple treasure, but that's another story. And so super unique. But even still, even with a hammer and a stylus, it is it looks like 5 different handwritings on the Copper Scroll. So I'll tell you one theory that is that the Copper Scroll is related to an old, really the only surviving piece of this oral tradition that we have is from a medieval Amsterdam document by a Jewish Kabbalist. So a Jewish mystic named Rabbi Naftali Hertz Bacharach. He wrote he wrote a book about Jewish mysticism in 1648. It was really rarely circulated, not something that many people knew about. But oddly, he inserted this story called The Treatise of the Temple Vessels at the very beginning of a book that otherwise has nothing to do with temple vessels. And so it feels like an echo of an oral tradition, and that somehow, it's being preserved by this medieval Kabbalist. But according to him, that there were 5 righteous men with access to the temple. And this is actually, he's talking about First Temple period, not Second Temple period. Oh. And he says, he names them, which, let me think, Shimor the Levite is the main one. Super interesting, because we don't have any Shimor the Levite in the Bible or any extra biblical sources, but that's who he names. But then he also names Hezekiah and Haggai, who we do know from the Bible. Yeah. Zedekiah and Zechariah, son of Iddo the prophet. That's how he names who was involved in this conspiracy of hiding temple treasures. Now, the treatise is wild, and it reads exactly opposite of the Copper Scroll. The Copper Scroll is kind of boring to read by itself, because you're just reading burial locations, how deep to dig, where to dig, and what you'll find when you're there. But the treatise is everything that the Copper Scroll isn't. It's saying, all of these vast amounts of treasures and what was buried, and it brings angels to help in the process, and talks about co-conspirators. Baruch, Jeremiah's scribe, is in the story. I mean, there's a lot of characters. There's a lot of glimmer and shine to this story. And so, whereas there's not a single verb in the Copper Scroll, the treatise just reads like a fantasy tale. But what it's preserving, or the story that it's telling, is that there was once 5 men who understood that the Babylonians were coming. They believed in the prophecies of Jeremiah and the writings as it was preserved by Baruch, and they got down to business, and they secreted some of the treasures out of the first temple and were able to hide them. It doesn't really say where they hid them. I guess it leaves that to the Copper Scroll. But what's most fascinating, so even if you wanted to dismiss, the Copper Scroll is actually a Second Temple document, so these two couldn't be related. But here's the part that and I even thought that at first, these two don't match up, because Copper Scroll seems to be dated from the Second Temple period, and this is a First Temple story. But you get to the very end, and it says that what did they do when they finished hiding all the documents? So actually, it's not in the end. It's more towards the third paragraph. But it says that when they were done hiding everything, when the operation was over, that they wrote it all down on a luach nechoshet, which translates copper tablet. Oh. Isn't that insane? And there was no copper tablet. I mean, that's not... Even when this story is being written down in the medieval period, nobody had ever found a copper tablet. So even if this Kabbalist writing in Amsterdam, it's not as if the Copper Scroll wouldn't be found for a few hundred years even at that point. So it was real work of his imagination if he was able to somehow come up with this idea that temple treasures were secreted out, hidden, and then written down where they were on a copper tablet. So that's the part that I can just never quite shake, of how those two are related.
That is fascinating, and doubly so, as I should have done my more homework before this afternoon, because Sharon and I are in our weekly Bible study right now in the book of Zechariah, who was one of the prophets who was exhorting the Israelites, the Jews who'd returned to Jerusalem from Babylon, to build the temple, get the temple built, the Second Temple period. Haggai was another one. He was writing in about 520 BC, prophesying, look, we need to get this done. It's a fascinating period of history because of the destruction of the one temple, the construction of the Second Temple. Does the Copper Scroll point to the location of the items that had been hidden from the Babylonians before Nebuchadnezzar breached the wall of Jerusalem? We'll talk about that. What digging is being done, and what is the role of Jim Barfield, retired criminal investigator, in all of this? How did he decipher this and begin to put us on the track of finding the temple treasure? Again, it sounds like a movie plot, The book is The Copper Scroll Project. The website, thecopperscrollproject.com. Shelley's website is shelleyneese.com, Neese. The links will be in the show notes. And our conversation continues. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.
Jack the Ripper's dark deeds actually began long before 1888. And it wasn't a mere man who committed the crimes, but a demon in league with devilish men, a group of men called Red Wing. Only one small group of valiant men and women stand against this evil, a group that place their faith in Christ alone, and they protect a secret of blood that Red Wing hopes to use to usher in the reign of Antichrist and the end of day.
Red Wing is called Red Wing because they want to kill the church. They want to forever stop Christ from coming back. So it's the Holy Spirit, the dove, with a murdered, has been slain, a wounded dove. Ultimately, we still have to remember that the one who is in control is God Almighty, and we have to go to Him, and we have to suit up every time we go out.
The Red Wing Saga by Sharon K. Gilbert.
Book 1.
Blood Lies.
Book 2.
Blood Rights.
Book 3.
The Blood is the Life.
Book 4.
Realms of Stone.
And coming soon, Book 5.
Realms of Fire. Available at SkywatchTVStore.com and paperback and Kindle at Amazon.com. Characters you'll love and a story you can't put down. The Red Wing Saga by Sharon K. Gilbert. A new take on the prophesied war of Gog and Magog. Forget about Russia coming from the uttermost parts of the north. The enemy foreseen by the prophet Ezekiel is so much bigger and so much older. It's Last Clash of the Titans by Derek P. Gilbert, a #1 new release in Amazon's Christian history category. Last Clash of the Titans breaks down step by step how Greek mythology grew out of Canaanite religion, why the old gods of the Greeks, the Titans, were the Watchers who descended on the summit of Mount Hermon, and why the Titans will return from the abyss for one final battle against God, Armageddon. Last Clash of the Titans, backed up by peer-reviewed academic research. Tom Horn calls this book stunning. Last Clash of the Titans, the second coming of Hercules, Leviathan, and the prophesied war between Jesus Christ and the gods of antiquity. Get it as part of a special offer at SkywatchTVStore.com and available now in paperback and as a Kindle ebook at Amazon.com. Driving the internet to think. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. What a conversation tonight. By the way, if you're interested in the Copper Scroll Project, I should point out that our guest tonight, Shelley Neese, will be one of the featured speakers at the upcoming Skywatch TV Defender Conference, August 2nd through 4th in Branson, Missouri. For more information, log on to defenderconference.com. Shelley, as we continue talking about your book, The Copper Scroll Project, how did Jim Barfield get involved in this, and why did it take so long for anybody to figure out what the Copper Scroll was actually pointing to?
Right. Well, there have been a few people. John Allegro, the one who I said championed opening up the scroll, he gave a little crack at it himself in terms of going to try and find Copper Scroll treasure. He didn't prove to have sort of the patience or the wherewithal he wasn't an archaeologist. And so he gave up a little early. He inspired two people after him who were also a little bit more rogue explorers. I cover those people in the book. So there have been a total of 4 explorers who have gone after the Copper Scrolls prize in some form or the other, whether or not they just focused on one spot or whether or not they were a little bit too curt in their process. That's all covered. But Jim Barfield is by far the only one who is still at it, or at least still at it publicly. I feel some archaeologists, the Copper Scroll haunts them, but as archaeologists, they can't actually say that they're digging for Copper Scroll treasure. That would be a real career ender. And so Jim Barfield, he was just a Dead Sea Scrolls enthusiast. He's a retired arson investigator from Oklahoma who spent much of even his career as a firefighter reading Dead Sea Scrolls, in between fires or on the back of the fire truck. Just a really self-educated person, as I'm sure a lot of your listeners are and can identify with. And so loved the Dead Sea Scrolls, made a timeline that is probably 12 feet long. It was before Excel. Now he has a pretty intense Excel document, but 15, 20 years ago, it was written on butcher paper, and when he would roll it out, it would be 12 feet long, but he called it the Messiah timeline. And so for a long time, he would study the Dead Sea Scrolls and just plot sort of messianic prophecies or prophetic fulfillments and plot them down, biblical and also extra biblical, just things that were in the Dead Sea Scrolls or the things that he was reading, like from the Book of Jubilees or Enoch, and just trying to sort of collaborate that all together. And the process, though, never really took much thought to the Copper Scroll, because, like I said, it doesn't have value if that's what you're looking for, if you're looking for prophecy or for historical tidbits. Mm-hmm. And so someone who loved his Messiah timeline work suggested for him to have dinner with Vendell Jones. Vendell Jones might be familiar to some people listening. He looked for Copper Scroll treasure for 30 years, really focused all of his efforts on one cave called the Cave of the Column that's outside of Qumran. And, well, it's in the Judean desert. It's a fair piece outside of Qumran. But anyways, and so for 30 years, dug in the same place and dug it well, excavated it well. And Vendell traveled a lot in the States and spoke about the Copper Scroll. And I mean, Vendell Jones lived, ate and breathed Copper Scroll. And so I think Jim Barfield went wanting to talk to him about the Dead Sea Scrolls in general, but Vendell Jones just wanted to talk about the Copper Scroll. And so when he came away from that meeting, he thought, you know what, I'm going to give the Copper Scroll another look, not with an eye to solve it per se, but just Vendell Jones claims that there's more prophecy and more historical value in the Copper Scroll's first lines than any of the other Dead Sea Scrolls, which maybe is a bit of an overstatement, but it was something that Vendell Jones felt like the Copper Scroll was electric. So he did. He came home. He looked at the Copper Scroll closer. He had a Strong's concordance on his desk. He had an aerial map of Qumran, and he had an English translation of the Copper Scroll, a pretty common one by Garcia Martinez. And from the very start, he just looked at the very first lines, which say, "Under the ruins and the valley of Achor," and instead of doing what everyone else had done, which was really take that as just applying to the very first location of all the Copper Scroll treasure, he immediately saw that as a preamble saying, under the ruins in the valley of Achor, everything that follows, the next 60 locations that I'm about to tell you, that I'm about to note that follow, are buried under the ruins in the valley of Achor, which was different. I mean, so it's not mind-boggling that he would read it that way, but no one else had ever read it that way. They just applied it to the first location. And so he looked at a map of the Judean desert and thought, well, here's the traditional, here's where this east 18 miles of area that we traditionally associate with the Valley of Achor, the biblical Valley of Achor. It's familiar from the story of Ai, and someone was stoned to death there. Achan was stoned to death there. So, and it's in the prophetic book of Hosea. So anyways, the Valley of Achor comes up in the Bible, and people have had some tradition and understanding of where that is, and saw, well, what ruins? If there's ruins, and there were ruins then when the Copper Scroll was etched out in its final form, what ruins? And really the ruins that stand out the most to anyone, certainly the most famous ruins in that area, are the Qumran ruins. Also, it makes sense because Cave 3 is just a couple, it's very close to the Qumran ruins, like all of the Dead Sea Scroll caves. So where the Copper Scroll was found is not so far away from Qumran at all either. So from there, he just went to all of the different architectural descriptions that are there in the Copper Scroll to see, well, maybe I can find matches in the Qumran ruins for some of the things that are described here. And the Copper Scroll will say things like a dry cistern or stairs facing eastward or double entry mikvahs or wells or peristalls. So, it's very specific in the way it describes things architecturally. So and it always with what Jim Barfield will call as, 5 fingerprints. So if it's a double entry mikvah facing east, it'll give about 5 fingerprints so it doesn't feel like just a coincidence if you happen to find this. And so in his case, the very next thing was it was supposed to be steps facing eastward that measured 40 cubits. And so, he oriented his aerial map of Qumran to the directions of the compass and said, well, here's steps facing eastward. I wonder how long they are. I wonder if they're 40 cubits. And he was able to find just recently before that, a 10-year-long excavation conducted by the 2 top Israeli archaeologists at Qumran had just published their results. And so in those results, they actually included the exact length of those stairs, and it was exactly 40 cubits. I mean, he had to convert the metric system to cubits, but it was exactly 40 cubits. So he just kept going from there. For the first 20 locations, was able to, within 20 minutes, really identify places right there in Qumran that matched what he was reading in the Copper Scroll. And he didn't know where Copper Scroll scholarship was at the time. He didn't know. Maybe other people have thought about this. Maybe other people have recognized this. For him, it seems like a flash of the obvious. But he had never actually been to Israel before. So he he was so on fire by what he was seeing. Anytime you're doing research, right? I mean, you have that kind of feeling that just overtakes you. You're right. So that's what happened. And he thought, I have to get to Israel. I have to see if I'm just making this up before I go any further with this. So he had identified the first 20 locations, went to Israel with his wife for the first time. Never did he think, he had longed to go to Israel. Never did he think it would be to try and verify his Copper Scroll research. But that's what he did. And he by being able to walk Qumran and walk the research out, he was almost immediately able to figure out the next locations as well. He eventually went back and he did his own Copper Scroll translation. He's a report writer. He's an arson investigator. So he's nothing if not very thorough. Mm-hmm. And in the end, he had a 265-page report complete with aerial photos, graphic elements displaying where these things would have been buried and how, and exactly how the match was with the transcriptions of the Copper Scroll locations. It's a piece of work in and of itself. When I first met him and I got the report, I thought, I guess it's good to be retired.
Yeah, I look forward to that day when I can be retired and actually get some work done. So just to make sure I understand correctly, the Valley of Achor was a reference to a valley, as you mentioned, near the city of Ai, which is in the vicinity of Jericho. And he took that as sort of a coded reference to a location there where the scroll was found, there at Qumran, on the west side of the Dead Sea. So by applying that reference to the topography of the ground there at Qumran is how he managed to do I understand that correctly? Is that what he did?
Exactly. Exactly. Now, there are other ruins in the Valley of Achor. It's a broad sweep of land, and like everywhere in Israel, you stick a shovel in the ground almost anywhere in Israel, and you're going to find some antiquity. So there are other ruins, and he was prepared to see if he could find matches in other ruins, but he basically never needed to go anywhere other than Qumran. Also, now, once he's been doing this for 10 years, also, once you really study Qumran and study the level of purity that the Essenes were keeping there, the number of mikvahs, which was higher per capita than Jerusalem, then you think that perhaps they knew the secret that they were harboring temple treasures, that they were hiding temple treasures, then then the level of purity makes sense. When you look at the archaeological record, there's things that can't be explained at Qumran. They bury animal bones in a sacrificial method almost, so we know that they revered Jerusalem, and we know that they longed to go back to Jerusalem even though they were in a self-imposed exile because they considered the Jerusalem leadership corrupt. But they treated their own compound, Qumran, with the same level of holiness, actually a stricter level of holiness than applied to Jerusalem. And their own people, everyone kept the same standard of purity as the entire priesthood, which was more than Jerusalem ever called for itself. So then all of a sudden it starts to make sense. We've never known why they were so aesthetic, why they were so strict. But now it seems to make sense. Jim Barfield will say it sometimes in terms of the comparison of, don't you want a eunuch to guard your harem? I mean, so don't you want these guys who have sworn to purity, who have made vows to basically pool their property and not have any personal property themselves? I mean, kind of like the community of Acts. Don't they seem like the best people to protect the temple treasury? So in that way, it all makes sense. I want to say one more thing about the Valley of Achor, because I've never remembered to say this in any interview, but this is how I always even sign my books, is with Hosea 2:15. So even though we think of the Valley of Achor as this, I mean, it's a dark place. It's where a stoning happened. It was where a punishment happened because of things being stolen from Jericho, and then losing the Battle of Ai, using the Urim and Thummim to distinguish who was the perpetrator. So so it's a place of punishment, basically, is how we think of it in the Bible. But in Hosea 2, it makes this promise that the Valley of Achor will one day be a door of hope. It says, "There I will give her back her vineyards, and will make the Valley of Achor a door of hope. There she will sing as in the days of her youth, as in the day she came out of Egypt." So it's this idea, there's this promise. Isaiah says the same thing, Valley of Achor, a resting place for the herds, for my people who seek me. So the Valley of Achor, later on in the prophets, not in the Torah it's a place of punishment, but in the prophets, they have this idea that the Valley of Achor will be redeemed, that it will be a place, the door of hope, and a resting place.
The book is
amazing.
Yeah, it is. The book is The Copper Scroll Project. Shelley Neese is the author. We're talking with her on A View from the Bunker. So with the information that Jim was able then to put together and extract from the Copper Scroll Project, did he go to the Israel Antiquities Department? I mean, who the Antiquities Authority there? And is there anyone in Jerusalem or Israel right now who is helping to locate this treasure?
Right. So here's where the story gets frustrating. It had a high point in 2009. So Jim Barfield was able to meet with the Israel Antiquities Authority, which that's a crazy story in and of itself. And he gets a meeting with them, and we have it on audio of the head of the Israel Antiquities Authority saying, Jim just showed him the first 5 locations of his research. There's 60 plus locations. He showed him the first 5. And at first, the head of the Israel Antiquities Authority, Shuka Dorfman, he's passed away since, but he seemed almost, he was kind of holding the meeting as a favor to a friend. He seemed kind of irritated to be there, kind of putting Jim Barfield in the category of probably the million Ark of the Covenant hunters he meets all of the time, or try and host meetings with him. But after the first 5 locations, he was in. And so Jim Barfield had an audio recorder in his pocket. I don't know if necessarily Shuka Dorfman knew that, but he wanted to, in case anything was said in Hebrew, he wanted to have it on recording. And so he said, hold on. And he called the head of Qumran, which was 2 archaeologists that are Israeli archaeologists in charge of Qumran. And they just completed a 10-year excavation at Qumran. But he said, on the recording, we hear him saying, I think he's got it.
Oh.
I think he's got it. And so sure enough, he met later on that week with the 2 heads of Qumran, which, based off of what they had just published, I mean, they were actually dismissing Qumran as just an old pottery factory, totally not important in Israel's history, not important at all in terms of probably not even the people who lived there probably didn't even write the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's just a coincidence that they were in caves around there. I mean, that was their conclusion. So Jim Barfield's coming in there with this idea that not only that actually elevates Qumran even more than the status that it was already at, which was pretty high. And so he did a dig with this head archaeologist, the one who says, I think he's got it. And we got a phone call. We are on day 3 digging at this one cave that had the most potential. Now, granted, it's difficult. Qumran's special, and it was becoming clear even by day 3, how are we going to do this without upsetting ruins that are pretty important? Because the Copper Scroll says to dig 9 to 12 feet 2,000 years ago. So imagine how, you're going to...
A little more dirt piled up since then, yeah.
Right. These are going to be some pretty serious probes and a site that is important to Israel as it is right now. And so that's where the problem came into be, but it was okay. We were going to get a metal detector. We were going to try and really zone in on the location and have some certainty, because there's no promise that there's Roman arrowheads at Qumran. There's no promise that at some point that an enemy nation didn't find the Copper Scroll treasure themselves. Certainly there was a battle at Qumran around the time of Christ and around the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, so we can't really account for that. Maybe they found all the Copper Scroll treasure. Josephus talks about a priest giving up secrets. Maybe he was one of the Copper Scroll authors. We don't know. That's not something that Jim Barfield ever tries to promise. He does think that he's found the locations. But anyways, so only I find out 6 years later kind of what that phone call was about, and now I know it was American archaeologists who were stepping in, who were upset that this American fireman with no academic credentials was, and it's not as if he was leading the dig. I mean, he was technically an observer status, but still, that was even too much. That was too much, and so the dig got stopped, and really jeopardized, pretty much put it in a stalemate of just bureaucratic quicksand from that point. The archaeologist who had took the risk and who had digged with Jim Barfield and who got stopped by these American archaeologists, he died later in a tragic cave accident. And so it just, between all of these things happening, it really stalled out until the point that Jim Barfield, he never let go of the thread, but he did hit a point that he wanted to just wait for Israel to reach out to him. He really just sort of, he's a man of faith, and so he really just appealed to God and said, I've kind of done what I can. I've shown the right people the research, and so fast forward a few years later, and the Sanhedrin is asking for a meeting with him.
That is where I was going to go next, because in our final, 8 to 10 minutes here, the subtitle of your book, of course, is How an Ancient Secret Fuels the Battle for the Temple Mount. And I'm sure in your capacity, somebody who is, works to educate the public about Israel and someone who's lived there, how the drumbeat, if you will, for the construction of the Third Temple is picking up its tempo here. We're in the 70th year of Israel's independence. 70, of course, is a very significant number biblically. And the Sanhedrin is calling for the 70 nations, all of the other nations of the world, to participate in the blessings of the Third Temple. So what is happening, and how is the Copper Scroll playing a role in this?
Exactly. Well, so there's lots of different groups that are supportive of the Third Temple and are making movements in that direction. So I'll put them all under the umbrella of calling them the Temple Mount movement. And so it's the Temple Mount movement who has really championed Jim Barfield and really, because archaeology, there's a debate going on in Israel right now with the Palestinian narrative and the Arab narrative of whether or not there was ever a Jewish temple on the Temple Mount.
Yeah.
No historian, no archaeologist, no serious, sane person, including even Arabs and Palestinians 100 years ago, would have ever said that. This is a new form of denial, or historic denial, but it's a problem. And so it's a problem that Israel's recognizing. And because they can't do excavations on the Temple Mount, because that's closed to excavations, there's not a ton of archaeology from the interior of the First or Second Temple. We have the retaining wall, we have evidence from the exterior, but still, when there's this false narrative out there they would love to be able to hold up some relic, some vessel connected to the Jewish temple. And not only a claim of provenance of the Temple Mount, which is, a hotly debated piece of real estate, but also as something to awaken believers. Not Israel is a pretty secular society as well. It's pretty divided along those lines. Jerusalem's obviously more religious, but just even this idea that if Jim Barfield calls it that this is their birthright, that this is their wedding dowry, if these Copper Scroll items could be returned to them, think how much it would just awaken the faith of all unbelievers in terms of being able to hold up something substantial that even the biblically illiterate know the Ark of the Covenant. They know the altar of incense. They know the value that these things have. So being able to unearth those and just what that would mean for end times, mean for, prophecy and prophecy fulfilled is so huge. And so it's the Temple Mount movement that really has championed the Copper Scroll Project, and Jim Barfield has been attached to them. I know we have only a few minutes, so I'll just say that Moshe Feiglin he's a member, was a former member of Knesset but he's a Temple Mount leader. Temple Mount movement leader, been arrested on the Temple Mount for praying. And so he actually took a metal detector and with Jim Barfield did a scan of Qumran, not of the whole thing, but of a few of the most important sites, because he had Knesset immunity. He was a Knesset member at the time. And that's when Jim's Copper Scroll theory became more than just a theory.
So something appears to be under the sand at Qumran.
The metal detector we had was a Lorenz DeepMax metal detector. And that metal detector can tell you the difference if it's ferrous or non-ferrous metal. So, whether or not it's gold, silver, or bronze. It can tell you how big and how deep. So, yes, what I'll tell you is that in at least 3 spots of what we scanned at Qumran, Moshe Feiglin scanned at Qumran, there's something large, metal, and non-ferrous. So something large metal and gold, silver, or bronze buried underneath Qumran. And that we can now say with certainty it's not just a 267-page report anymore.
Now, at the copperscrollproject.com, I watched one of the videos earlier today, and according to the scroll, there's something like 900 talents of gold in one of these locations. Is that correct?
Right. If you add up all of the talents together, it's 160 tons.
That's more than just the 900 talents. That one cache alone is worth about $87 million in current at the current spot trading price. But the overall value, you're talking into the billions.
Right. Which, and that's just the monetary value.
Right. That's just from a strictly, commercial mercenary perspective. But, setting that aside and looking at the historic and the religious significance of this could be the greatest archaeological find in all of history.
Ever. And once again, it would be found, we already say that about the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's the most important so far. And so that's why I think that what if the Dead Sea Scrolls were just the tip of the archaeological iceberg? What if that was just the beginning and Qumran still has more to tell us?
Wow. I'm really sorry. When we did our Israel tour last year, we just drove by on Highway 90 and kind of waved at the caves. So I think we're going to need to say, and in fact, I see that Jim is going back and we're going to be there at the same time. Maybe we can piggyback on his tour or something. I don't know.
That would be amazing. Bring a metal detector.
Wow. A few years ago, the USA Network did a series called Dig. And I've rewatched it, and I know the theology behind it is whacked, and some of the historical facts are incorrect, but you almost get a little bit of the sense of the significance that some people behind the scenes must be putting on this. Do you think there are people, and you can speculate here if you want, I'm not asking you to tell me anything that I'm not supposed to know, but do you suspect that there are people behind the scenes who are trying harder to find this than they're letting on publicly? And I'm not talking about Jim, I'm talking about other people who may see this as almost forcing the hand of God to move prophetically.
Sure. Well, so technically, One thing that complicates the issue is that Qumran is technically Area C, so it's disputed territory in Israel. So it's not under the same archaeological laws or processes as Israel proper. It's technically Judea, Samaria, so it's a disputed territory. So anything that comes out of the ground there, it's important to note that by international law standards is a disputed artifact. And so one thing that I've never known but would provide some explanation is if we are stopped, if this new information goes before the archaeological authorities, which that's why we're just trying to flood the market with this new piece of information and with the scan and with the story, so that there could be a grassroots effort to find these things. Because I actually think that there's some fear, mostly on the part of Israel, of what happens if something's found, and also what is the effect. Will it be protested? Will Jordan claim it? Will the Palestinians claim it? Will they say, if there's not enough cameras and witnesses there, will they say it's all faked? I mean, this is the kind of world that we're living in, and this is the potentiality. So right now, I think it's the opposite. I think that there's not people looking for it, that there's potentially people who are stopping it.
Well,
and maybe with good reason, like I was saying, if it has to go into a military warehouse.
Where it'll be examined by top men.
Exactly.
Shelley Neese is the author of the Copper Scroll Project. It is a fascinating story and one that is not yet fully told. Shelley, where do people find a copy of the book?
Sure. It's on Amazon, but it's also anywhere you buy books.
All right. Wherever fine books are sold. And she, again, will be one of the featured speakers at the upcoming Skywatch TV Defender Conference in August. You'll find out more, have a chance to ask questions directly. And for more information, you'll find that at defenderconference.com. Shelley, thank you for the time tonight. She'll also be, I should point out, a guest on upcoming episodes of Skywatch TV during the month of February, and we'll be talking about those as we get closer to broadcast. Because,
right. You can get the book through Skywatch, too. Yep. I should note that.
We will have a special deal on that, along with the new books by Tom Horn and Carl Gallups, so that should be something to watch for. So, Shelley, thanks again for your time tonight. We look forward to seeing you in August, and boy, just a fascinating story. Exciting to be a part of it.
Thanks, Derek. Thanks for having me.
Well, prophetically significant, and one of the things that some have been saying is prophetically significant is the super blood wolf moon that is approaching. In fact, just a couple hours away here in the U.S. We'll talk about that in just a little bit, and a couple of other things as we wrap tonight. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker. Cutting-edge analysis of end-times prophecy on the very ground where it all unfolds. It's the Skywatch TV Wars of the Gods Tour of Israel, May 12th through 23rd, 2019, hosted by Derek and Sharon Gilbert, and Pastor Carl Gallups, best-selling author of Gods and Thrones and Gods of Ground Zero, Messianic Rabbi Zev Porat of Messiah of Israel Ministries, and filmmakers Justin and Wes Fall, producers of the Hollow Earth Chronicles. This is a once-in-a-lifetime tour of the Holy Land from Mount Hermon to the Dead Sea. You'll walk in Jesus' footsteps on the battlegrounds of the supernatural war with preaching and teaching along the way. Shiloh, Bethel, Mount Carmel, Nazareth, the Jordan River, the Mount of Olives, Sea of Galilee, the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jerusalem, where the final battle will be fought for God's Mount of Assembly, Zion. The Skywatch TV Wars of the Gods Tour of Israel. Reserve your place now. For information and registration, log on to lipkintours.com. That's lipkintours.com.
We've been told that America is a Christian country from its origin. One nation under God. We've been taught that our government is for the people, by the people. But what if it's all been just a grand deception? What if the God, worshipped in secret by government leaders in our nation's capital, is in fact our enemy, and many of our leaders have been venerating him secretly through arcane rituals, setting the scene for the incarnation of this ancient entity?
They used the powerful energy of ninth degree sex magic, through which the goddess Babylon herself might appear in human form.
What if everything we thought we knew about this great nation was designed to bring about the greatest conspiracy of all time? A conspiracy for the souls of humanity. What if I told you that America was founded by the darkest elite secret societies, and that there are still powerful remnants controlling hands in high positions, carrying this torch? Dr. Thomas Horn, Wes Fall, Russ Dizdar.
It's like God ripped open Hell's Kitchen and said, hey, here's some of the sequence of satanic evolution.
William Ramsey, Colonel Robert McGinnis, Carl Teichrob, Justin Fall.
It is the ritual that would ignite the resurrection of the Antichrist.
Belly of the Beast.
Coming soon from Fall Brothers Productions, Defender Films, and Skywatch TV. This is A View from the Bunker, coming to you from the Missouri Ozarks this Sunday night, January 20th, 2019. I'm Derek Gilbert. Next week, Gods from the Stars? Well, no, not really, but that's what they want you to think. Ali Siadattan, the director of UFOs, Angels, and Gods, joins us next Sunday night. That's January 27th, here on A View from the Bunker. Fascinating stuff. Again, I love archaeology. Archaeology is cool, and love the fact that it is revealing things about the Bible and biblical history that we didn't know before. By the way, speaking of Belly of the Beast, I need to call back to that Belly of the Beast. It is, of course, out now and available, but not only is it out in DVD form, it is available to stream in HD. So if you are listening to this tonight or at any point in the future, you know, via the time-shifting technology of the podcast, you can watch the movie in full HD, 1920 by 1080, not the, 720 by 480 that DVD technology compresses video down to. You watch it in full HD through Vimeo. So it's available on demand at Vimeo.com. You'll find a link for that at SkywatchTV.com. Hopefully we're going to have our travelogumentary. I've got to give Aaron Judkins credit for that term. Aaron Judkins and his filmmaking partner, Ty Taurus. We'll be talking to them in a few weeks as well about their recent travelogumentary to Qumran and to Petra. Yeah, we're kind of in a theme here. We're also going to talk about archaeology at the site of the biblical Sodom in a couple of weeks. So yeah, that's kind of a recurring theme here on this program. But again, that's because I think it's cool. Anyway, hopefully Sharon and I will be able to offer our travelogumentary for our tour of Israel, Jordan, and Sardinia last May via Vimeo. We just need to do a couple of things there. And speaking of streaming video, there will also be streaming video from the Skywatch TV Defender Conference, because that conference is very nearly sold out, if it's not sold out already. Sorry to say. So if you can still check tomorrow. The folks will be at the Skywatch TV store back at the offices by 9 a.m. Central Time, and you can check on the availability of registrations for the conference. But if you can't be there, we will have the presentations available to stream in full HD shortly after they're completed. This will be the way the Hear the Watchman folks do their videos, where the presentation will be recorded and then uploaded, so that if the internet connection at the Radisson Hotel in Branson gets a little hinky, which it can when you've got 1,100 people inside the hotel all hitting the Wi-Fi, hopefully, by recording it and uploading it all at once, you delay the presentations by about an hour, but at least that way there's no interruption in the video stream. So we've got information coming on that for the Skywatch TV Defender Conference in the days ahead. You'll see that on the 5 and 10 daily updates. As soon as we got information on it, I'll be putting that out there at skywatchtv.com. Well, a lot of stuff going on still in the world, and not least of which, of course, is the great great, spectacular is a better word, total eclipse of the moon tonight. We are seeing it here across the United States. And there are some who have suggested that it's prophetically significant because it will be seen over Washington, D.C. President Trump, of course, has been compared to a modern-day Cyrus by some who have looked at, compared his support of Israel and the steps that he has taken to really make good on promises that American presidents have been making since Bill Clinton in 96, when Congress said, we're going to move the embassy to Jerusalem, but the presidents had kept deferring it every 6 months. For 20 years, we kept deferring every 6 months the move of the American embassy. Finally, Donald Trump did it. And he did it during the 70th year. In fact, it coincided with the 70th anniversary of Israel's Declaration of Independence. So, yeah, it was 70 years after Israel after the kingdom of Judah was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, the temple destroyed, and the leaders hauled off to Babylon, that Cyrus, the Persian, said, okay, I'm issuing a decree, you all can go back and rebuild your temple. Draw that comparison, if you will. Is that an accurate comparison? I don't know. I can see why some would say so. But then tonight, we've got this full moon, total lunar eclipse, which is the only time you can have a total lunar eclipse, is during a full moon. And just bear in mind that if we try too hard to establish a connection between this type of astronomical event and Bible prophecy by comparing it to the timing of a Jewish religious festival, there are going to be a significant number of them times when this is going to overlap, because being on a lunar calendar, the feasts decreed by Yahweh in the Old Testament will always fall at in a time of the month when the moon is either full or new. So I don't know that we can call this prophetic, but certainly this super blood wolf moon is what they're calling it. So this will begin at about 10:41 p.m. tonight Central Time, 11:41 p.m. Eastern. Central Time in the United States is 6 hours behind UTC, so 10:41 p.m. UTC -6. So we'll be done here about 9 o'clock our time, and an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes later, the moon will be totally behind the shadow of the Earth. The entire eclipse will be visible in North and South America, Greenland, Iceland, Ireland, Great Britain, Norway, Sweden, Portugal, and in France and Spain. Europe, Africa will have partial viewing before the moon sets, and there are places on the web that are live streaming it. So if you're somewhere in the world where you can't see it tonight, if you're listening to this live, you can find it somewhere on the web and be able to watch it. While it's here at its darkest in the United States, in Jerusalem, it is going to be about 4:34 a.m. So, no, 5:34 a.m. We're 7 hours behind Jerusalem, so probably not visible there. But again, the significance, according to those who are seeing prophecy in this some sort of prophetic fulfillment, in that it will be visible, presumably in Washington, D.C., weather permitting. Here, I think skies are clear enough. We'll be able to see it, and so that'll be cool. I'll step out on the deck, stay up a little later tonight than I normally do, and take a look. So, well, disturbing news from Washington, not from Washington, but from Rome. Washington, D.C. is sort of a new Rome. The whole point of the documentary Belly of the Beast and some of the discussions that we had. By the way, this past week we were over at Morningside in Blue Eye, Missouri. Jim Baker and Lori Baker had us over there to, along with Tom Horn and Justin Westfall, the filmmakers behind Belly of the Beast, to talk about why Washington, D.C. has got so much occult significance. Even the very layout, the geometry of the layout of the city, so much pagan imagery, the buildings in Washington, D.C., the fact that we've got pagan idols on so many of our buildings. I mean, we see that all over the country. Here in Missouri, the Capitol Dome in Jefferson City is topped by the goddess Ceres, the goddess of grain. I mean, why? For a Christian nation, why do we have these pagan gods all over our government buildings? Why do the buildings look like temples, pagan temples from ancient Greece and Rome. Well, anyway, that was the conversation at Blue Eye. That program will air, I believe, beginning later this week. But kind of interesting that Washington, D.C. deliberately laid out to reflect Rome. And just as in St. Peter's Square, where you've got the obelisk, which has pagan significance, represents the member of the Egyptian god Osiris. You've got one in Washington, D.C., oriented toward the Capitol Dome. And again, there's occult significance in that. Yeah, watch the programs. We'll let you know when those are going to air on the Jim Baker Show, and I'm sure they'll have excerpts at their website. If you missed it on the Skywatch TV archives, you can go back and find those at skywatchtv.com or the Skywatch TV YouTube channel. Anyway, from Rome itself, Associated Press reporting tonight that the Vatican received information in 2015 and 2017 that a bishop in Argentina close to the Pope had taken naked selfies, exhibited obscene behavior, and been accused of misconduct with seminarians. This is according to his former vicar general, which contradicts claims made by the Vatican that allegations of sexual abuse against this bishop were only made a few months ago. Oh, we didn't know. Bishop Gustavo Zanchetta, he resigned in August of 2017 after priests in the northern Argentine Diocese of Oran complained about his rule. Apparently he was a rather dictatorial. But there were other reports sent to the Vatican a couple of years earlier that alleged abuses of power, inappropriate behavior, and sexual harassment of adult seminarians. This according to the former vicar, Reverend Juan Jose Menzano. So, another scandal that implicates Pope Francis and the Catholic hierarchy in knowing more than they've been letting on about sexual abuse inside the Roman Catholic Church. The mishandling of cases of sexual abuse of minors and misconduct with adults. Church leaders have been summoned by Pope Francis to a summit in Rome next month to try to figure out where the church goes from here, but there is a crisis of confidence growing in his ability to set a direction when it appears that he's been covering for friends and colleagues accused of such behavior. Now, the Roman Catholic Church is not the only one in Christendom that's guilty of this type of behavior, but it is the largest denomination on planet Earth. And when this corruption goes right to the top, it is disturbing. There is a struggle taking place inside the Roman Catholic Church right now, and that's why we bring it up. Not because we take any joy or pleasure in it, but just because what affects Rome, the Vatican, is affecting an awful lot of professing Christians across the planet. So speaking of prophecy, let me get to this real quick, because I think this is an aspect of the Third Temple talk that we kind of overlook. Those of us who are not, really familiar with the layout of the Temple Mount and how things will need to play out for a third temple to be built. When the forces of Islam took the Levant, captured what is now Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Israel, from the Eastern Roman Empire in the 630s AD. Okay, just a brief timeline. Muhammad fled the holy city to Medina in 620, and immediately realized that he wasn't going to get anywhere with just 100 followers, so he began he get a new revelation from Allah. We could go out and start raiding camel caravans and keeping the booty. We can take the stuff, enslave them, unless they convert, in which case they can convert and they can keep stuff when we raid them. So he'd been preaching for about 10 years at that point when he finally got run out of his tribe, the Quraysh. Said, look, you're disturbing the pilgrim trade. You're making people upset, and it's hurting business, so go away. So he left. He had 100 followers by this point after 10 years of preaching, and they were mainly family members. When he started saying, well, you know, Allah says it's okay, we can go out and start stealing stuff and enslaving the people who won't join us. Within 10 more years, by about 630 AD, they had pretty much conquered all of the Arabian Peninsula. Everything that is now Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, they owned it all. I mean, it was a pretty sweet deal. Anyway, Muhammad died in 632. By about 636, if I remember the history correctly, they had defeated the Eastern Roman Empire at the Battle of Yarmouk and taken Damascus and then Jerusalem. And it wasn't long after that the Caliph decided to build the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And it is believed that the Dome of the Rock is on top of what used to be the Holy of Holies inside the Temple of Solomon, and then the Second Temple as well. Now, that was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70. So there's a gap of about, 600 years? Not quite 600 years, 550 years maybe, between the destruction by the Romans and the construction of the Dome of the Rock. But a rabbi who's a Temple Mount expert said in an interview this weekend, and I've seen him give this interview before, published interviews, I've not watched video, but his name is Harry Moskoff, Moskoff, who believes that the Temple Mount, or rather the Dome of the Rock, is not actually on top of the Holy of Holies. And the reason he thinks this is because of the research of a scholar at Hebrew University who found that one of the most revered rabbis in the history of Judaism, Maimonides, went and visited the Temple Mount and entered the Dome of the Rock and this was sometime in the 12th century. This would have been possibly during the time when Israel was, or Jerusalem was occupied and held by the Crusaders. But anyway, Maimonides, according to Moskoff, would not have gone into the Dome of the Rock if he thought it was the location of the Holy of Holies, because until it's purified, in fact, really Orthodox, really religious Jews don't want anybody going on the Temple Mount at all because they're not quite sure where it is, and you might accidentally step on the Holy of Holies and bring judgment upon yourself. So, according to Moskoff, Maimonides wouldn't have gone in there if he thought that was the location. So, it's possible, if he's right, a third temple could be built on the Temple Mount next to the Dome of the Rock. Don't know. Interesting theory. Here's another theory. Sacrifices were held in the tabernacle for over 300 years before Solomon built the temple. I mean, all of the time that the Israelites were wandering and all of the time that the tabernacle was at Shiloh, centuries, they didn't have a temple building to conduct the sacrifices. So, anyway, a lot of activity and a lot of political and religious pressure being brought to bear on the government in Israel to try to get the third temple built. And, of course, this copper scroll, and if Jim Barfield is correct, the location of hundreds of millions, perhaps billions of dollars worth of gold, silver, not to mention the treasures hidden from the Babylonians, located under the ground there at Qumran. This is a very, very interesting time to be alive. 2019 is going to be an exciting year. For a number of reasons, we'll tell you about a few events that we've got coming up this year. Something new that I'm getting involved with. Ray and Tracy Gano are putting together what they're calling the Last Days Online Summit. Last Days Online Summit. This isn't a conference where you travel somewhere. This is getting access to presentations and information over the internet so that if you're not able to attend a conference. I understand that getting time away from work, if you've got kids or pets, that makes travel difficult, not to mention the cost of travel. Right now, with the partial government shutdown and TSA, it could be, a hassle. But the internet connects us all. So, the Last Days Online Summit, they're going to get this up and running this week, Ray tells me. It'll include more than 28 hours of exclusive video on a variety of subjects. I've contributed 2 videos, one based on my book, The Great Inception, and another based on the book, Last Clash of the Titans. So, condensed a little bit because, when I'm in front of a crowd, I, kind of play the crowd a little bit. It's a little difficult to do when you're staring into a camera. But anyway, that's what's there. You get other things, other exclusive content, PDF books, a resource library worth over $100, an MP3 library of audio teachings worth over $250, access to a private Facebook group, and future videos as they are added. All of this available as part of the Last Days Online Summit, and I will have links for you at vftb.net or my personal website, DerekPGilbert.com. They've got the website up already. It's lastdayswarrior.com. You can see some of the other participants in this Last Days Summit. The Hear the Watchman Conference coming to Dallas. Sharon and I honored to be a part of that again this year, March 28th through 31st. Same location, the Hilton DFW Lakes Conference Center. That's near the airport there in Dallas-Fort Worth. Speakers include L.A. Marzulli, Russ Dizdar, Pastor Carl Gallups, and Rabbi Zev Porat, our 2 other guides on our upcoming tour of Israel and Jordan. Pastor Paul Begley, Dr. Michael Lake, Coach Dave Daubenmeier, Pastor Casper McLeod, Michael Boldea, and just added, I forgot Josh Peck and Stephen Bankars. Can't forget them, but just added Irvin Baxter of End Time Ministries, and Gary Wayne, the author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. And it's been too long. I need to get Gary back on this program because our discussions are always fascinating. Did one program with next week's guest and Gary, Ali Siadattan, on another podcast, and it was, wow, 2 hours flew by like 20 minutes. Anyway, for information and to register for the Hear the Watchman Conference, it's hearthewatchman.com, and we can save you $20 on the registration. Save $20 on the registration by using our promo code. That's Gilbert20. Gilbert20 at hearthewatchman.com. Mentioned earlier the Skywatch TV first annual Defender Conference. This is something brand new. Tom Horn had run a couple of conferences back in 2010 and 2011. Now, we're branding it under Skywatch TV. So all of us from Skywatch TV will be there. Me, Sharon, Josh Peck, Joe Horn, Donna Howell, and of course, Tom Horn himself. Dr. Michael Heiser will also be a featured speaker. Pastor Carl Gallups, Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis, Dr. Michael Lake, and of course, Shelley Neese, our guest on tonight's program, talking about the Copper Scroll Project. And you'll have a chance to get the book there, get it signed, ask questions, have her find out more than we were able to cover in just a span of 1 hour. This is going to be in Branson, August 2nd through 4th of 2019 at the Radisson Hotel. Now, again, we ran a broadcast program on this on Skywatch TV's over-the-air networks this past week. A week ago. And it may be sold out already. If not, it's very, very close. So you can check. The website is defenderconference.com, defenderconference.com. That link will take you to the website for registration. We're going to have information on live stream. Well, I'm not live streaming, but video streaming very, very shortly. And if you can't be there, at least take advantage of the video streaming. And this is going to be a one-of-a-kind conference. Heiser, Horn, Gallups, McGinnis, and music by Dino Kartsanakis. Do you know he's got a little bakery in Branson? His carrot cake is to die for, believe it or not. The True Legends Conference comes back to Branson September 13th through the 15th. This will be at the Mansion Theater in Branson. The theme this year is Answering the Alien Question. L.A. Marzulli, Steve Quayle, Timothy Alberino, Dr. Hugo DeGaris, Richard Dolan, and more. And yours truly, honored to serve as the servant of ceremonies again this year. Looking forward to that. And then in October, Sharon and I will be part of a new conference, the Unsealed Scroll Prophecy Conference. Sharon and I both speaking. L.A. Marzulli, Russ Dizdar, Bill Salas, and more. That will be at the Grand Hyatt in San Antonio, October 4th through the 6th. We'll have more information on that as it becomes available. Well, fascinating conversation tonight. Hope you enjoyed it. Please leave us a review. Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever else you find us, which, of course, is wherever fine podcasts are sold. Give us a like. Discuss the topic tonight at our View from the Bunker page and Facebook. View from the Bunker, production of Gilbert House, released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Our opening theme is Iron Bacon by Kevin MacLeod. His website, Incompetech.com. Our announcer, DC Good. Please remember, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.